Blood streaked across the dirt as Margaret Coleman staggered forward, one hand pressed to her side, the other clutching her younger sister's wrist so tightly that her knuckles had gone white. The pain was blinding, but the fear of what lay behind them was worse. "Maddie, please," 16-year-old Elizabeth begged, tears streaming down her face. "You're hurt bad. We need to stop." "Can't," Margaret gasped, fighting to stay conscious as the warm Arizona sunset painted the desert landscape in hues of orange and red. "They might still be following us." It was 1878, and Vulture City was still 3 miles ahead, 3 impossibly long miles of unforgiving desert. The sisters had fled the mining camp after 3 drunken prospectors had cornered them on their way home from delivering laundry. When one of the men had grabbed Elizabeth, Margaret had intervened without hesitation. She'd fought like a wildcat, but the flash of a knife had ended the struggle with a sickening slice across her ribs. Margaret stumbled, her legs finally giving out beneath her as she collapsed to her knees. The world tilted dangerously, darkness creeping in at the edges of her vision. "Lizzie," she whispered, "you need to run. Get to town, find help." "I'm not leaving you," Elizabeth cried, dropping down beside her sister. "I won't," Margaret tried to respond, but her mouth felt stuffed with cotton. She slumped forward, vaguely aware of her sister's frantic cries fading into the distance as consciousness slipped away from her. The rhythmic pounding of hooves against packed earth penetrated the darkness. Margaret forced her eyes open, squinting against the setting sun to see a rider approaching fast, dust billowing behind him. Her heart hammered with renewed fear. Had the men from the mining camp found them? The rider reined his horse to a stop and dismounted in one fluid motion. Tall and broad-shouldered, he approached cautiously, his hands held open and visible. "You ladies all right?" he called, his voice deep but gentle. Elizabeth positioned herself protectively in front of Margaret. "My sister's been hurt. She needs a doctor." The stranger crouched down to examine Margaret, his face lined with concern beneath the shadow of his wide-brimmed hat. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 25, with a strong jawline and eyes the color of a summer storm. "Name's Adam Everly," he said. "I've got a ranch about a mile from here. I can get you there quick and send for the doctor from town." Margaret tried to speak, but another wave of pain washed over her. She felt herself being lifted, strong arms cradling her against a solid chest. The world spun as he placed her carefully on his horse. "Your sister can ride behind me," she heard him tell Elizabeth. "Hold on tight to my waist and I'll keep hold of your sister. We'll get you both to safety." The last thing Margaret remembered before darkness claimed her again was the gentle rhythm of the horse beneath her, and the secure feeling of Adam's arm around her waist, holding her steady as they rode toward sanctuary. When Margaret next opened her eyes, she was lying in a bed with crisp, clean sheets. Sunlight streamed through lace curtains, illuminating a simply furnished but tidy bedroom. For a moment, she couldn't recall how she'd gotten there. "Maddie." Elizabeth's familiar voice drew her attention to the bedside, where her sister sat in a wooden chair, her face pale with worry. "Lizzie," Margaret croaked, her throat dry. "Where are we?" "At Mr. Everly's ranch," Elizabeth explained, offering a cup of water. "He brought us here yesterday evening. The doctor's been and gone, said you lost a fair amount of blood, but the knife didn't hit anything vital. You need to rest and let the wound heal." Margaret sipped the water gratefully, wincing as the movement pulled at her bandaged side. "Those men from the mining camp, Mr. Everly sent word to the sheriff," Elizabeth assured her. "They were arrested this morning." A soft knock at the door interrupted them. Adam Everly entered, carrying a tray with a bowl of steaming soup. "Miss Coleman," he said, offering a warm smile. "Good to see you awake. Thought you might be hungry." Margaret was suddenly acutely aware of her disheveled appearance. She pushed herself up straighter against the pillows, ignoring the pain in her side. "Mr. Everleigh," she said formally, "I don't know how to thank you for your help." "No need for thanks, madam. Anyone would have done the same." He set the tray on the bedside table. "My housekeeper, Mrs. Barton, prepared this. She's been looking after your sister as well." Margaret studied him in the daylight. Adam Everleigh was handsome in a rugged way, with sandy brown hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck and a face tanned from hours under the sun. Unlike many men she'd encountered in mining towns, his eyes held kindness rather than calculation. "How long have I been unconscious?" she asked. "Just overnight," he replied. "Dr. Jenkins said you're strong as a mountain lion. Should be up and about in a few days, though you'll need to take it easy for a while longer." "We can't impose on you for that long," Margaret protested. Adam shook his head firmly. "It's no imposition. I've got plenty of room here, and Mrs. Barton appreciates the company. You and your sister are welcome to stay as long as necessary." Elizabeth glanced between them with a curious expression. "Mr. Everleigh has a beautiful ranch, Mattie. He's shown me around this morning. There are horses and cattle and even a small orchard behind the house." "Been working this land for 5 years now," Adam said, a note of pride in his voice. "Came out from Missouri after the war with nothing but determination and a good horse. Built everything you see with my own hands." Margaret couldn't help being impressed. Most men who came west seeking their fortunes ended up drifting from place to place, chasing the next opportunity. Few had the perseverance to build something lasting. "It's very kind of you to take us in," she said sincerely. "Rest now," he said, backing toward the door. "I'll check in later. Your sister knows where to find me or Mrs. Barton if you need anything." After he left, Elizabeth leaned forward eagerly. "Isn't he wonderful, Mattie? And so handsome, too?" Margaret gave her sister a stern look. "Don't get any romantic notions, Lizzie. We'll stay only until I'm well enough to travel, and then we'll be on our way to California as planned." Elizabeth's smile dimmed. "But where will we go? We've lost everything, our wages, our few belongings, all left behind at that awful camp." Margaret hadn't considered that. In their desperate flight, they'd abandoned the small room they'd been renting, along with their meager possessions and hard-earned savings. The realization left her feeling hollow. "We'll manage," she said with more confidence than she felt. "We always have." Over the next few days, Margaret's strength gradually returned. By the 4th day, she was able to walk slowly around the bedroom, and by the 6th, she ventured out to sit on the covered porch that wrapped around the front of the ranch house. Adam's home was more impressive than she'd initially realized, a solid 2-story structure built of sturdy timber, with a stone foundation and a wide porch perfect for catching the evening breeze. The ranch itself sprawled across several hundred acres of surprisingly lush land, with a creek running through the property providing water for both the household and the livestock. She was admiring the view of distant mountains when Adam joined her, carrying 2 glasses of lemonade. "Mrs. Barton's specialty," he said, offering her a glass. "Secret recipe, though I suspect the secret is just extra sugar." Margaret accepted with a smile. "Your housekeeper is a treasure. She's been so kind to Lizzie and me." "Been with me since I started this place," Adam said, settling into the chair beside her. "She was a widow looking for work, and I was a bachelor who couldn't cook worth a damn. Worked out well for both of us." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching as the ranch hands moved cattle in the distance. "Your sister tells me you were headed to California," Adam finally said. Margaret nodded. "Our parents died of fever 2 years ago. We've been working our way west ever since, taking jobs where we could find them. There's supposed to be good opportunities in San Francisco for women willing to work." What kind of work were you doing in that mining camp? His tone was carefully neutral. Laundry mostly. Some mending. Margaret's fingers tightened around her glass. It wasn't ideal, but the pay was decent. We were saving up for the final stage of our journey. Adam studied her for a moment. Mining camps are no place for two young women alone. We didn't have much choice, she said, a defensive edge creeping into her voice. Not many respectable options for women without family or connections. No judgment here, he assured her. Just concern. Those places attract a rough element. We learned that the hard way, Margaret said softly, her hand unconsciously moving to her bandaged side. Adam's expression darkened. Sheriff Willis sent word. They've got those three locked up tight. They'll be sent to Yuma Territorial Prison for assault. Good. The word came out harsher than she'd intended, but Margaret couldn't find it in herself to regret it. They deserved worse for what they tried to do to Lizzie. You're very protective of your sister, Adam observed. She's all I have left in this world, Margaret said simply. I'd do anything to keep her safe. She feels the same about you. Girl's been worried sick while you were recovering. Barely left your side those first 2 days. Margaret smiled fondly. Lizzie has a tender heart, too tender sometimes for this harsh world. And you? Adam asked. What kind of heart do you have, Miss Coleman? The question caught her off guard. A practical one, I suppose. Someone has to be. Adam nodded thoughtfully. Well, your practical heart and her tender one make a good pair. You balance each other. They fell silent again, but Margaret found herself sneaking glances at her rescuer. There was something compelling about Adam Everly, a quiet strength that put her at ease despite her usual wariness around men. I should check on dinner, Adam said eventually, rising from his chair. Mrs. Barton mentioned something about roast chicken tonight. Your appetite improving any? Yes, thank you. The fresh air seems to help. As he turned to go, Margaret called after him. Mr. Everly, he paused, looking back. Adam, please, Mr. Everly was my father. Adam, then. I just wanted to say, I'm grateful. Not just for the rescue, but for your hospitality. Not many would do what you've done for two strangers. Something flickered in his eyes, something warm that made Margaret's breath catch. Maybe you're not strangers anymore, he said quietly, then continued into the house. That evening at dinner, Margaret noticed how naturally Elizabeth chatted with both Adam and Mrs. Barton, a plump, motherly woman in her 50s with kind eyes and capable hands. Her sister had always been the sociable one, making friends easily wherever they went. Margaret, on the other hand, had learned to keep people at a distance, a protective measure developed through necessity. Mr. Everly, Adam was telling me about the Autumn Harvest Festival in Vulture City, Elizabeth was saying excitedly. There's music and dancing and all sorts of competitions. It sounds wonderful. It's a good time, Adam agreed. Folks around here work hard all year. The festival gives everyone a chance to relax and celebrate before winter. When is it? Elizabeth asked. 3 weeks from now, Mrs. Barton said as she passed a basket of fresh bread. First weekend in October. The whole town comes alive with decorations and festivities. Margaret shifted uncomfortably in her chair. In 3 weeks, they should be well on their way to California, not attending local festivals. Perhaps we'll hear about it when we reach San Francisco, she said carefully. A brief silence fell over the table. Elizabeth's face fell, and even Mrs. Barton looked disappointed. Adam cleared his throat. Actually, I've been meaning to talk to you about that. I could use some help around the ranch. With fall coming, there's plenty of work preparing for winter, preserving food, mending clothes for the hands, that sort of thing. Mrs. Barton can't manage it all herself anymore. My old bones aren't what they used to be, the housekeeper agreed, though Margaret suspected the woman was hardier than she let on. I'd pay fair wages, Adam continued. More than you were making at that mining camp, I'd wager. And you'd have safe lodging here at the house, at least through winter. The mountain passes to California can be treacherous once the snow falls. Margaret hesitated, torn between suspicion of such generosity and the practical advantages of the offer. That's very kind, but, oh, please can we stay, Maddie? Elizabeth interrupted, her eyes bright with hope. Just until spring. We could save even more money for California, and I could attend school in town. Mr. Collins, the schoolteacher, said I could join his classes even though I'm a bit older than the other students. You've been busy making arrangements, Margaret said, giving her sister a pointed look. Elizabeth had the grace to look slightly abashed. I was just asking questions. But wouldn't it be nice to stay in one place for a while? Somewhere safe. Margaret couldn't deny the appeal. The last 2 years had been a constant struggle for survival, moving from town to town, taking whatever work they could find. The idea of spending winter in this comfortable home, earning honest wages and knowing Elizabeth was safe, was tempting. You don't need to decide tonight, Adam said gently. Think it over. The offer stands either way. Later that night, after Elizabeth had fallen asleep in the bed they shared, Margaret stood by the window, gazing out at the star-filled sky. The desert night was clear and vast, the Milky Way stretching across the heavens like a river of light. In the distance, a coyote called, its lonesome cry echoing across the land. There was something about this place that pulled at her a sense of possibility she hadn't felt in a long time. But years of hardship had taught Margaret to be cautious, especially of kindness that seemed too good to be true. What did Adam Everly really want? Men didn't typically offer employment and shelter to women without expecting something in return. Yet he had been nothing but respectful since bringing them to his ranch. Margaret sighed, pressing her forehead against the cool glass. Perhaps he was simply a good man. They did exist, rare as they might be. Her father had been one honest and hardworking, devoted to his family until the day he died. The thought of her father brought a familiar ache to her chest. What would he advise her to do now? Stay where they had found safety, or continue the journey they had planned? The answer came to her with surprising clarity. Her father would want them to be safe, yes, but also to find a place where they could build something for themselves, not just survive, but thrive. Maybe this ranch, at least for now, could be that place. As September gave way to October, Margaret found herself settling into life at the Everly Ranch more easily than she had anticipated. The wound in her side healed cleanly, leaving only a thin scar as a reminder of that terrifying day. She took over management of the household linens and mending, while also helping Mrs. Barton with cooking and preserving the late harvest from the garden and orchard. Elizabeth attended school in town 3 days a week, riding in with Adam or one of the ranch hands in the morning and returning in the afternoon. She blossomed under the teacher's attention, her natural intelligence finding an outlet after years of limited education on the road. Margaret was kneading bread dough one morning when Adam appeared in the kitchen doorway. He'd been out since dawn checking on cattle in the far pastures. "Morning," he greeted her, removing his hat and hanging it on a peg by the door. "Smells good in here, Mrs. Barton is teaching me her recipes," Margaret explained, tucking a stray lock of hair behind her ear with the back of her wrist to avoid getting flour on her face. "She says every ranch wife should know how to make bread that will keep the hands happy through a long winter." As soon as the words left her mouth, Margaret realized their implication. She felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I mean, it's good knowledge to have," Adam said smoothly, saving her from embarrassment. "Though I suspect you could manage just about anything you set your mind to, Margaret Coleman." The way he said her name, with a mixture of respect and something deeper, made her pulse quicken. Over the past weeks, they had developed an easy friendship, sharing stories during evening meals or occasional rides around the property. She had learned that Adam had fought for the Union during the Civil War, enlisting at 18 and returning home 3 years later to find his parents dead from influenza, and the family farm sold to pay debts. "I came west to start fresh," he had told her one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Too many ghosts back in Missouri." In turn, Margaret had shared stories of her own past her childhood in Pennsylvania, her father's work as a blacksmith, her mother's talent for storytelling. She'd even revealed their darkest days after their parents' deaths, when they'd nearly starved before finding work as housemaids for a wealthy merchant's family. "We left after the merchant's son made improper advances toward Lizzie," she had admitted. "He was only 16, but already thought he could take whatever he wanted. His mother accused Lizzie of encouraging him, so we left that night." Adam hadn't judged, had only listened with understanding in his eyes. That was part of what drew her to him, his ability to hear the hard truths of her life without pity or condemnation. Now he leaned against the doorframe, watching her work the dough with strong, sure movements. "The Harvest Festival is this Saturday," he said. "Thought you and Elizabeth might like to attend." Margaret hesitated. "I'm not sure." "The whole town will be there," he continued. "Good food, music, dancing under the stars. It would do you both good to enjoy yourselves after everything you've been through." "I don't have anything suitable to wear to such an occasion," she admitted. Adam smiled. "Already taken care of. Mrs. Barton mentioned that to me last week. She and Elizabeth have been working on something for you, said it was a surprise." Margaret stared at him in astonishment. "They've been making me a dress." "When?" "During those afternoons you've been busy in the garden, I reckon. Elizabeth wanted to thank you for all you've done for her over the years. Said you always put her needs before your own." Emotion tightened Margaret's throat. She shouldn't have. "We need to save every penny. The fabric was my contribution," Adam interrupted gently. "Consider it a thank you for all the work you've done around here. The place hasn't run this smoothly in years." Margaret didn't know how to respond. She wasn't accustomed to receiving gifts, especially not thoughtful ones like this. "So, will you come?" Adam asked, his expression hopeful. "I'd be honored to escort you and your sister." Looking into his earnest gray eyes, Margaret found she couldn't refuse. "Yes," she said softly. "We'd love to attend." His smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Wonderful. I'll let Mrs. Barton know. She'll be pleased." After he left, Margaret returned to kneading the dough with renewed vigor, trying to sort through the conflicted feelings in her heart. She hadn't intended to form attachments here. This was supposed to be a temporary arrangement, just until spring when they would continue to California. But with each passing day, the pull to stay grew stronger. And it wasn't just the security of the ranch or Elizabeth's happiness at the school. It was Adam himself, his quiet strength, his integrity, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. Margaret was falling in love with him, despite her best efforts not to. The realization both thrilled and terrified her. Love was a luxury she hadn't allowed herself to consider, focused as she'd been on survival and protecting her sister. Even now, was it something she could permit herself to feel? California had been their dream for so long, a place to make a fresh start far from the hardships of their past. But perhaps dreams could change. Perhaps they could build something here, in this desert that bloomed with unexpected beauty. Saturday dawned clear and bright, with just a hint of autumn crispness in the air. Margaret stood still as Elizabeth and Mrs. Barton helped her into the new dress they had made, a creation of deep blue cotton with delicate white piping along the bodice and sleeves. "It brings out the blue in your eyes," Elizabeth said excitedly. "Oh, Maddie, you look beautiful." Margaret hardly recognized herself in the small mirror Mrs. Barton held up. The dress fit perfectly, accentuating her slender waist and the gentle curves she usually kept hidden beneath practical work clothes. Her dark hair, normally pulled back in a simple bun, had been arranged in soft waves that framed her face. "The dress is lovely," she said, touched by their efforts. "Thank you both so much." "You deserve something pretty," Mrs. Barton said firmly. "Been working yourself to the bone since you got here. Time to enjoy yourself for once." Elizabeth looked equally transformed in a dress of soft green that complemented her honey blonde hair and hazel eyes. At 16, she stood on the cusp of womanhood, her features still holding a hint of childish roundness, but her figure growing more womanly by the day. "Won't Adam be surprised when he sees us?" Elizabeth said with a mischievous smile. "He's only ever seen us in work dresses." "Mr. Everlie," Margaret corrected automatically, though the formality felt increasingly unnecessary. Mrs. Barton exchanged a knowing look with Elizabeth. "I suspect he'll have eyes only for your sister, my dear." Before Margaret could protest, they heard the sound of a wagon pulling up outside. Adam had gone into town early to help with festival preparations, promising to return with transportation more suitable than a saddle horse for ladies in fine dresses. Margaret's heart fluttered nervously as they made their way downstairs. She wasn't used to being the center of attention and wasn't sure how to accept admiration gracefully if it came. Adam stood in the entrance hall, dressed in his Sunday best, a dark suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly, with a crisp white shirt and string tie. He looked handsome and somehow more approachable without his usual cowboy attire. When he saw Margaret, he went completely still, his expression one of undisguised wonder. "Margaret," he breathed, the single word filled with admiration. "You look incredible." She felt a blush warm her cheeks. "Thank you." Elizabeth and Mrs. Barton worked magic. "The dress just shows what was already there," he said sincerely, then turned to include Elizabeth in his praise. "You both look lovely. I'll be the envy of every man at the festival." The ride into Vulture City was filled with Elizabeth's excited chatter about what she hoped to see and do at the festival. Margaret remained quieter, acutely aware of Adam beside her on the wagon seat, his arm occasionally brushing against hers as he handled the reins. Vulture City had been transformed for the festival. Colorful bunting stretched across the main street, and lanterns hung from every available post in preparation for evening. The normally dusty thoroughfare had been swept clean, and tables laden with food and drink lined one side of a cleared area that would serve as a dance floor later. As they made their way through the growing crowd, Margaret noticed people looking at them with curious interest. Adam was clearly well respected in the community, receiving nods and greetings from everyone they passed. Many cast speculative glances between him and Margaret, making her uncomfortably aware of how their appearance together might be interpreted. "Adam Everlie," called a booming voice. A portly man in a suit too tight for his frame approached, hand extended. "Good to see you, son. And who might these lovely ladies be?" "Mayor Thompson," Adam greeted him. "May I present Miss Margaret Coleman and her sister, Miss Elizabeth Coleman. Ladies, this is Mayor Howard Thompson." "Delighted, absolutely delighted," the mayor said, pumping Margaret's hand enthusiastically. "We've heard about the unfortunate incident that brought you to our area. Terrible business, but I'm pleased to see you recovered, my dear." "Thank you, sir," Margaret replied politely. "The Colemans are staying at my ranch through the winter," Adam explained. "Miss Elizabeth has been attending school with Mr. Collins." "Excellent, excellent," the mayor beamed. "We can always use more refined female influences in our little community." Too many rough sorts with the mind still operating. He lowered his voice conspiratorially. Between us, I've been trying to convince this confirmed bachelor beside you to settle down for years. Told him a man needs a good woman to make a house a home. Margaret felt her face grow hot with embarrassment while Adam looked equally uncomfortable. I'm sure Mr. Everly will make that decision in his own time, she said diplomatically. The mayor winked at her. Of course, of course. Well, enjoy the festivities. The apple pie contest starts in an hour not to be missed. As the mayor waddled away to greet other arrivals, Adam turned to Margaret with an apologetic expression. I'm sorry about that. The mayor means well, but subtlety isn't his strong suit. It's all right, Margaret assured him, though her pulse was still racing from the implication. Small towns run on gossip, I understand. Elizabeth, who had been taking in the exchange with undisguised interest, suddenly exclaimed, There's Jenny Collins, my friend from school. May I go say hello? Adam nodded. Go ahead. We'll be right here. As Elizabeth darted off toward a group of young people gathered near a game of ring toss, Margaret and Adam were left alone for the first time that day. Would you like to walk around a bit? He suggested. There's much to see. Margaret nodded, grateful for the opportunity to move past the awkwardness of the mayor's comments. They strolled through the festival grounds, stopping occasionally to admire handcrafts or watch competitions. Adam purchased paper cones of roasted nuts for them to share, the sweet, spicy aroma mingling with the sense of barbecue and baking that permeated the air. Your community seems very close-knit, Margaret observed as they watched a group of children playing a game involving apples and water buckets. It's one of the things I love about this place, Adam said. Back east, people live on top of each other but barely know their neighbors. Out here, we depend on one another, makes for stronger bonds. And less privacy, Margaret added with a small smile. Adam chuckled. That too. Sometimes feels like everyone knows your business before you do. A thought occurred to Margaret. Is that difficult for you? Being the subject of speculation regarding your unmarried state, I mean. He considered the question seriously. It was, at first. When I came here, I wasn't looking to form attachments, had enough loss in my life already. His expression grew reflective. But over time, I've come to see that they push because they care. They want me to have what many of them have found a partner to share life's burdens and joys. And is that something you want? The question slipped out before Margaret could stop it. Adam's gaze met hers, his eyes suddenly intense. I didn't think so. Not until recently. The implication hung in the air between them, neither quite ready to acknowledge it directly. Margaret's heart pounded in her chest as she searched for a response. She was saved by the arrival of the sheriff, a tall, lean man with a neatly trimmed mustache and the weathered look of someone who had seen his share of frontier justice. Everly, he greeted, tipping his hat to Margaret. Madam. Sheriff Willis, Adam replied. How are things? Peaceful so far, the sheriff said, though we've got a few too many cowboys in town with money burning holes in their pockets. Might get rowdy later. He turned his attention to Margaret. You must be Miss Coleman. Glad to see you recovered from your ordeal. Yes, thank you, she said. I understand I have you to thank for apprehending the men responsible. The sheriff's expression hardened slightly. Just doing my job. Those three are cooling their heels in Yuma now. Won't be troubling decent folk again for a long while. He glanced between them with shrewd eyes. You planning to stay in the area, Miss Coleman? Through winter, at least, she answered carefully. My sister and I are grateful for Mr. Everly's hospitality while we decide on our future plans. The sheriff nodded, as if confirming something to himself. Good, good. This is fine country once you get to know it. Takes a special kind of woman to appreciate its beauty, though. With another tip of his hat, He continued on his rounds, leaving Margaret to ponder his words. Was the sheriff, like the mayor, making assumptions about her relationship with Adam? Special kind of woman, Adam mused, echoing the sheriff's phrase. He's right about that. Before Margaret could ask what he meant, the band began playing in the center of town, a lively tune that had couples forming lines for a Virginia reel. Would you care to dance? Adam asked, offering his arm with a slight bow. Dancing wasn't something Margaret had done often, but she found herself nodding. I'd like that. As they joined the forming lines, Margaret caught sight of Elizabeth, already paired with a young man Margaret recognized as the blacksmith's apprentice. Her sister's face was alight with joy, a reminder that despite all they had endured, Elizabeth had retained her capacity for simple happiness. The dance began, and Margaret was caught up in the pattern of advancing, retreating, spinning under Adam's raised arm. His hand was warm and steady when it held hers, his steps sure as he guided her through the figures. For those precious minutes, Margaret allowed herself to forget the past and the uncertain future, living fully in the moment. When the music ended, she was flushed and breathless, smiling up at Adam with unguarded pleasure. His answering smile sent warmth spreading through her chest. Another? He asked as the band struck up a waltz. This dance was different, closer, more intimate. Adam's hand rested respectfully at her waist, the other holding hers as they moved in time to the music. Margaret was acutely aware of his nearness, the clean scent of soap and leather that clung to him, the steady rhythm of his breathing. "You're a natural dancer," he said, guiding her smoothly through a turn. "I had few opportunities to practice," she admitted. "But my father used to dance with my mother in our kitchen on Saturday nights. They taught Lizzie and me the basic steps. They sound like good people." "The best," Margaret said softly. "I still miss them every day." "That kind of love stays with you," Adam observed. "Shapes who you become." Margaret nodded, struck by his perception. They loved each other deeply through hard times and good. "I always hope to find something similar, though life hasn't exactly presented many opportunities." Adam's hand tightened slightly at her waist. "Sometimes opportunities appear when we least expect them." The music swelled around them, and for a moment, it felt as if they were the only two people in the world. Margaret allowed herself to imagine what it might be like to have this Adam's strength and kindness as a constant in her life. The thought was both exhilarating and frightening. As the waltz ended, Adam reluctantly released her, though he kept her hand in his as they made their way to the edge of the dance floor. "Would you like some punch?" he asked. "You must be thirsty after the dancing." "Yes, thank you," she replied, needing a moment to collect herself and the tumultuous emotions the dance had stirred. While Adam went to fetch refreshments, Margaret found a seat on a bench beneath a large cottonwood tree. From this vantage point, she could observe the entire festival. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden glow over the scene as lanterns were lit around the square. "You've got that young man quite smitten," came Mrs. Barton's voice as the housekeeper settled onto the bench beside her. Margaret started. "I don't know what you mean, Mrs." Barton gave her a knowing look. "Of course you do. I've known Adam Everlie for 5 years, and I've never seen him look at a woman the way he looks at you." "We've only known each other a few weeks," Margaret protested weakly. "Sometimes that's all it takes," the older woman said matter-of-factly. "My Harold and I knew within a week that we were meant for each other, married for 32 years before pneumonia took him." Margaret hesitated, then asked the question that had been troubling her. Has Adam courted other women in Vulture City?" Mrs. Barton considered the question. "There have been a few interested parties over the years, daughters of ranchers and merchants mostly, some widows too, but he never showed particular interest in any of them." She patted Margaret's hand. "Until now." I'm not sure what to do with that information, Margaret admitted. We're still planning to go to California in the spring. Are you? Mrs. Barton asked simply. Or is that just what you're telling yourself because it's safer than considering alternatives? Before Margaret could respond, Adam returned with 2 cups of punch. Mrs. Barton rose with a smile. Just keeping your seat warm, dear, she told Margaret. Enjoy the evening. Nights like this don't come along too often in life. As she walked away, Adam looked quizzically at Margaret. What was that about? Nothing important, Margaret said, accepting the punch gratefully. Just friendly advice. They sat together watching the festivities, commenting on the various contests and performances. As darkness fell completely, paper lanterns cast a warm, magical glow over the square. The music became slower, more romantic, and couples danced close together under the stars. It's beautiful, Margaret said, taking in the scene. I can see why you love this place. It grows on you, Adam agreed. The desert has its own kind of magic, harsh sometimes but honest. What you see is what you get. Unlike people, Margaret said thoughtfully. Some people, Adam corrected. Not all. Their eyes met, and Margaret felt that now familiar flutter in her chest. There was an openness in Adam's expression that invited confidence, as if he were waiting for her to share whatever was on her mind. Adam, a sudden commotion from the far side of the square interrupted her. Loud voices rose above the music, followed by the crash of breaking glass. Trouble, Adam said, setting down his cup and rising to his feet. Sheriff Willis was already moving toward the disturbance, hand on the butt of his revolver. A group of cowboys, clearly deep in their cups, were arguing with some local miners near the refreshment table. Stay here, Adam told Margaret. I'll go help Willis calm things down before they get out of hand. Margaret nodded, watching anxiously as he strode toward the confrontation. She scanned the crowd for Elizabeth, relieved to see her sister safely with Mrs. Barton and some of the other ladies near the band. The argument seemed to be escalating despite the sheriff's attempts to intervene. One of the cowboys, a lanky man with a shock of red hair, shoved one of the miners hard enough to send him sprawling into a table of pies. The crash sent pastry flying in all directions, eliciting gasps from the onlookers. Adam stepped between the red-headed cowboy and his next target, hands raised in a placating gesture. Margaret couldn't hear what he said, but his calm demeanor seemed to be having an effect on some of the men. The sheriff, meanwhile, had a firm grip on another troublemaker's arm. Just when it seemed the situation might be diffused, the redhead made a sudden lunge, pushing past Adam to throw a wild punch at one of the miners. In the ensuing scuffle, more tables were overturned, and the crowd scattered to avoid the flailing fists. Margaret lost sight of Adam in the confusion. Worried, she stood and moved closer, trying to spot him in the melee. When she finally did, her heart jumped to her throat. The red-headed cowboy had pulled a knife. The lamplight glinted off the blade as he waved it threateningly. Without thinking, Margaret pushed through the crowd. She had to warn Adam, who had his back to the armed man as he helped the sheriff restrain another troublemaker. "Adam," she cried. "Behind you!" He turned just as the cowboy lunged with the knife. Adam twisted, avoiding the worst of the strike, but the blade still caught his arm, slicing through his jacket sleeve. Several men from the crowd tackled the knife wielder, wrestling him to the ground as the sheriff pulled his revolver to restore order. Margaret rushed to Adam's side. "You're hurt." He grimaced, clutching his bleeding arm. "It's not deep, more of a scratch than anything." But Margaret could see blood seeping through his fingers, staining the torn fabric of his jacket. "You need that tended to right away." The sheriff approached, having handed the cowboy off to his deputy. "Ever lie you all right? I'll live," Adam said dryly. Just ruined a perfectly good jacket. Get yourself patched up, the sheriff ordered. We'll take care of these troublemakers. Festival's pretty much over now anyway. People were already beginning to disperse, mothers gathering children, merchants salvaging what they could of their wares. The magical atmosphere of earlier had been thoroughly broken. Let me see, Margaret insisted, gently moving Adam's hand away from the wound. The cut was about 4 inches long, but as he'd said, not dangerously deep. Still, it was bleeding steadily and needed cleaning and bandaging. Dr. Jenkins will still be at his office, Adam said. It's just down the street. Then that's where we're going, Margaret said firmly. Elizabeth. She called, spotting her sister making her way toward them with Mrs. Barton. Adam's been hurt. We need to get him to the doctor. Elizabeth's eyes widened at the sight of the blood. Oh my goodness, what happened? I'll explain later, Margaret promised. Mrs. Barton, could you take Elizabeth back to the ranch in the wagon? I'll stay with Adam and we can walk back once he's been treated. Nonsense, Mrs. Barton said practically. We'll all go to the doctor's, then head home together. No sense in you two walking all that way in the dark, especially with him injured. The doctor's office was small but clean, lit by several oil lamps that cast a warm glow over the examination table and cabinets filled with medical supplies. Dr. Jenkins, a slender man with spectacles and a neatly trimmed beard, had indeed been preparing to attend the festival when they arrived. Knife wound, eh? He said, examining Adam's arm with efficient movements. Seems to be your family specialty, Miss Coleman. Margaret winced at the reminder of her own injury, now mostly healed but still occasionally twinging when she moved too quickly. Not exactly how I planned to end the evening, Adam admitted as the doctor cleaned the wound with antiseptic that made him hiss through his teeth. Few stitches should do it, Dr. Jenkins decided. You ladies might want to wait outside. This won't be pretty. I'll stay, Margaret said resolutely. I've seen worse. Mrs. Barton took Elizabeth outside to wait with the wagon, while Margaret remained at Adam's side, holding a lamp to provide better light for the doctor's work. As Dr. Jenkins prepared his needle and thread, Adam looked up at Margaret with a rueful smile. Not exactly the romantic evening I had in mind. Her heart skipped at the word romantic. What did you have in mind? She asked softly. His eyes held her steadily. Definitely more dancing, maybe a walk under the stars, possibly even working up the courage to kiss you goodnight. Margaret's breath caught in her throat. Adam. Hold still, Dr. Jenkins interrupted. This will pinch. Adam barely flinched as the needle pierced his skin, his gaze still locked with Margaret's. There was a question in his eyes, and despite her usual caution, she found herself giving a slight nod in response. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, all 4 passengers lost in their own thoughts. Elizabeth dozed against Mrs. Barton's shoulder, exhausted from the excitement and drama of the evening. Adam sat beside Margaret on the rear bench of the wagon, his injured arm bound in clean white bandages, his good arm occasionally brushing against hers as the wagon jostled over the rutted road. At the ranch, Mrs. Barton helped a sleepy Elizabeth upstairs while Margaret lingered in the kitchen, preparing a cup of tea for Adam with herbs the doctor had recommended for pain. When Adam joined her, he had changed into a clean shirt, the right sleeve hanging loosely to accommodate his bandaged arm. You should be resting, she admonished gently, setting the steaming cup before him. Couldn't sleep yet, he said, lowering himself into a chair. Too much on my mind. Margaret sat across from him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I'm sorry your festival ended so poorly. Not your fault some cowboys can't hold their liquor. He took a sip of the tea, grimacing slightly at the bitter taste. Besides, it wasn't all bad. I got to dance with the prettiest girl at the festival. Margaret smiled despite herself. Hardly a girl. I'm 22. A woman, then, he corrected. The most beautiful woman I've ever known. The sincerity in his voice made her cheeks warm. You must not have known many women. Enough to know what I'm looking for, he said simply. The kitchen was quiet except for the ticking of the clock on the wall and the occasional pop from the banked fire in the stove. It felt intimate, this late-night conversation, as if they were the only two people awake in the world. "What happened tonight?" Margaret began hesitantly. "What you said at the doctor's office." "I meant it," Adam said, his voice low and earnest. "Every word. I know we haven't known each other long, but these past weeks, Margaret, I've never felt this way about anyone before." She looked down at her clasped hands, emotions warring within her. "I'm not sure what to say. This isn't what I expected when we came here." "Life rarely goes as expected," he observed. "Sometimes that's for the best." Margaret raised her eyes to meet his. "I care for you too, Adam." "More than I should, perhaps, but I have responsibilities. Lizzie's future to think about, plans we've made." "Plans can change," he said gently. "And from what I've seen, Elizabeth is happy here, thriving even." It was true. Her sister had blossomed these past weeks, making friends at school, learning new skills from Mrs. Barton, enjoying the security and stability of life at the ranch. "I've always tried to do what's best for her," Margaret said, "even when that meant setting aside my own wants and needs." "And what do you want, Margaret?" Adam asked, reaching across the table to cover her hands with his. "Not for Elizabeth, not for anyone else. For yourself." The question caught her off guard. For so long, her own desires had seemed irrelevant, subordinated to the practical needs of survival and her responsibility to her sister. "I want," she began, then paused, searching for words. "I want somewhere to belong. Somewhere safe, where I don't have to always be looking over my shoulder or planning our next move. I want to put down roots. I want—" Her voice faltered. "What?" Adam prompted softly. "I want someone to share that life with," she finished, barely above a whisper. "Someone I can trust with my heart." Adam's fingers tightened around hers. "Margaret, I'm asking you to consider staying, not just through winter but permanently, here with me." "Are you proposing?" she asked, her pulse racing. "Not yet," he said with a small smile. "That would be rushing things, even for me. But I am asking for a chance to court you properly, to see if what we both feel could grow into something lasting." Relief mixed with disappointment in her chest, relief that he wasn't asking for a commitment she wasn't ready to give, disappointment that some small part of her had wanted him to. "I think I'd like that," she admitted. His smile was like sunrise breaking over the desert, warm and full of promise. "Good, that's good." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, hands still joined across the table. Then Margaret remembered something. "You said at the doctor's office that you had planned to kiss me good night," she said, surprising herself with her boldness. Adam's eyebrows rose. "I did say that, didn't I?" "The night isn't over yet," she pointed out, her heart hammering in her chest. He stood slowly, moving around the table to stand before her. Margaret rose to meet him, tilting her face up to his. Adam's good hand gently cupped her cheek, his touch reverent. "You're sure?" he murmured. In answer, Margaret lifted herself on tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but deepened as Adam's arm encircled her waist, drawing her closer. Margaret felt as if she were melting, warmth spreading through her body as she responded to his kiss with increasing confidence. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. Adam rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as if savoring the moment. "I've wanted to do that since the first time I saw you truly smile," he confessed. Margaret touched his face wonderingly. "I'm glad you waited. It made it more special." He kissed her once more, briefly but tenderly, then stepped back with obvious reluctance. It's late. We should get some rest. Margaret nodded, though part of her was reluctant for the evening to end. Good night, Adam. Good night, Margaret, he replied, his voice warm with affection. Sweet dreams. As she climbed the stairs to the room she shared with Elizabeth, Margaret felt lighter than she had in years. The future, which had always seemed so uncertain, now held new possibilities that included Adam Everly and this place that was beginning to feel like home. The weeks following the Harvest Festival brought changes to the Everly Ranch. With winter approaching, activity increased as everyone prepared for the colder months ahead. Hay was stored for livestock, the last of the garden harvest was preserved, and the ranch hands repaired fences and outbuildings before the weather turned. Margaret threw herself into these preparations, learning from Mrs. Barton how to manage a ranch household through the changing seasons. She discovered that she had a talent for organization, efficiently directing the preservation of food and the preparation of winter clothing for all the ranch employees. Elizabeth continued her studies, bringing home books from the schoolteacher and spending evenings reading by the fire. Her friendship with Jenny Collins, the blacksmith's daughter, flourished, and she was often invited to social gatherings with the other young people in town. As for Adam, he was true to his word about courting Margaret properly. Despite his busy schedule overseeing the ranch, he made time each day to be with her, taking her on rides around the property, reading to her in the evenings, or simply sitting with her on the porch swing watching the sunset. Their growing relationship was the subject of much good-natured speculation in Vulture City. When they attended church together on Sundays, Margaret was aware of approving glances from the congregation, particularly from the older women who had long despaired of Adam remaining a bachelor. "You've become quite the topic of conversation," Elizabeth teased one evening as she brushed her sister's hair before bed. "Mrs. Thompson told me at least 3 people asked her if there would be a spring wedding." Margaret flushed. "People shouldn't gossip so." "It's not gossip if it's true," Elizabeth said slyly. "And it will be true, won't it, eventually?" "Lizzie," Margaret protested. "It's far too soon to be thinking of such things." But even as she said it, Margaret knew she was lying to herself. In quiet moments, she did think of becoming Adam's wife, of making this ranch her permanent home, of building a life and perhaps a family together. These thoughts both thrilled and frightened her. The last time she had allowed herself to depend on anyone other than Elizabeth had been before their parents died. Opening her heart again meant risking that same devastating loss. Yet with each passing day, as autumn deepened toward winter, the pull toward permanence grew stronger. The ranch no longer felt like a temporary sanctuary, but like a place where she belonged. One crisp November morning, Margaret rode with Adam to the far pastures where the cattle had been moved for winter grazing. The desert landscape had changed with the season. The summer's harsh browns softened to subtle golds and russets. In the distance, mountains rose against a sky so intensely blue it almost hurt to look at it. "It's beautiful here," Margaret said as they paused on a ridge overlooking the valley. "Different from what I expected when we first arrived." "The desert reveals itself slowly," Adam replied, dismounting to stand beside her horse. "Most folks only see the surface, the heat, the dust, the harshness. They miss the hidden life, the resilience, the unexpected moments of beauty." Margaret slid from her saddle to join him, like the wildflowers after a rain. "Exactly." He took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. "It takes patience to love the desert and an eye for what lies beneath the surface." They stood in comfortable silence, watching a red-tailed hawk circle lazily overhead. Adam's thumb traced gentle patterns on the back of her hand, sending pleasant shivers up her arm. "There's something I've been wanting to ask you," he said after a while. Margaret's heart quickened. Yes. Christmas is coming in a few weeks. I was thinking we might host a celebration at the ranch. Invite some folks from town, maybe even have a small dance. What do you think? Though not what she had expected, the idea delighted her. That would be wonderful. Elizabeth would love it, and Mrs. Barton has been saying the house hasn't seen a proper gathering in too long. Adam smiled, pleased with her enthusiasm. I thought it might be nice to create some new traditions. The ranch can be isolating in winter, and festivities help keep spirits up during the long, cold nights. We didn't celebrate much after our parents died, Margaret admitted. Just small tokens exchanged between Lizzie and me. It would be good to have a proper Christmas again. Then it's settled, Adam said, squeezing her hand. You and Mrs. Barton can plan the details. Whatever you need, just let me know. The prospect of organizing a Christmas celebration gave Margaret a new focus. Together with Mrs. Barton and Elizabeth, she made lists of decorations, food, and potential guests. The activity filled the short December days with purpose and anticipation. 2 weeks before Christmas, a winter storm blew in from the north, bringing unseasonably cold temperatures and a rare dusting of snow to the desert. The ranch hands brought the cattle in closer to the main buildings, and everyone stayed near the fires as much as possible. On the third night of the storm, Margaret sat in the parlor mending one of Adam's shirts while he read aloud from a book of poetry. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, but inside was warm and peaceful. A sudden pounding at the front door startled them both. Adam set aside his book and rose quickly, hand instinctively moving to the revolver he kept nearby. Who could that be in this weather? Margaret wondered, setting aside her mending to follow him. When Adam opened the door, a blast of cold air swept in, along with Sheriff Willis, his coat crusted with snow and ice. "Sheriff," Adam said in surprise. "Come in, man, before you freeze solid." Willis stomped his boots and entered gratefully. Margaret hurried to take his coat and hat while Adam stoked the fire. "Sorry to disturb you so late," the sheriff said, his normally composed face lined with worry. "But we've got trouble. The stage from Phoenix was due in yesterday. Finally arrived an hour ago with news that a family of settlers is stranded about 15 miles south of here. Their wagon broke an axle and they've got young children with them." Adam's expression grew grave. "In this weather, they won't last long. That's why I'm here," Willis continued. "I'm gathering men for a rescue party. Thought you might want to join, seeing as you know that territory better than most." "Of course," Adam said without hesitation. "I'll get my gear." Margaret followed him to the mudroom where he began pulling on his heavy coat and gloves. "It's dangerous out there," she said, unable to keep the worry from her voice. "Which is exactly why those folks need help," Adam replied, checking his revolver before holstering it. "Don't worry. I've weathered worse storms than this." She helped him wrap a wool scarf around his neck. "Be careful." "Please." Adam paused, looking down at her with tender eyes. "I will. We should be back by tomorrow evening at the latest." He bent to kiss her gently. "Keep the fires going." Margaret stood at the door, watching as Adam and the sheriff rode out into the swirling snow, their forms quickly swallowed by the darkness and the storm. A sense of foreboding settled in her chest, but she pushed it aside. Adam knew the land, and he was an experienced horseman. He would be fine. But as the night wore on and the storm intensified, Margaret found sleep impossible. She paced the parlor, added logs to the fire, and checked on Elizabeth and Mrs. Barton, both of whom had retired hours earlier. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a transformed landscape. Margaret had never seen the desert covered in snow. It was eerily beautiful, the white expanse broken only by the dark shapes of cacti and the distant mountains. Still, no word came from Adam or the rescue party. Mrs. Barton assured her this was normal. It would take time to reach the stranded family and bring them back, especially with a broken wagon to deal with. He'll be back when he's back, the housekeeper said pragmatically. No sense in worrying yourself sick. Adam Everly knows how to take care of himself. But when the short winter day began to fade into evening with no sign of the rescue party, even Mrs. Barton grew concerned. It's not like them to be out after dark if they can help it, she admitted. Especially not with children in tow. Just as they were debating whether to send one of the ranch hands to town for news, they heard horses in the yard. Margaret rushed to the door, relief flooding through her only to find Sheriff Willis alone, his face grim with exhaustion and something worse. "Sheriff," she said, dread pooling in her stomach. "Where's Adam?" Willis removed his hat, a gesture that made Margaret's knees weaken. "Miss Coleman, there's been an accident." The world seemed to tilt beneath her feet. "Is he?" "He's alive," Willis said quickly, seeing the color drain from her face. "But he's hurt. Doc Jenkins is with him now." "What happened?" Mrs. Barton demanded, coming to stand beside Margaret. "We found the family, got their wagon fixed well enough to travel," Willis explained. "On the way back, we had to cross Phantom Creek. The water was higher than expected from the snowmelt. Adam's horse lost its footing. He was swept downstream about a quarter-mile before we could reach him." "How bad is it?" Margaret asked, already moving to gather her coat and gloves. "Broken leg, maybe some ribs too. Took in a lot of water. But he was conscious when we got him to town, asking for you." The sheriff looked at her with compassion. "I came to fetch you, figured you'd want to be there." Yes, I need to see him." Margaret turned to Mrs. Barton. "Will you stay with Elizabeth? I don't want to worry her unnecessarily." The housekeeper nodded. "Of course, go to him. He'll heal faster with you there." The ride to town was tense, Margaret's mind racing with all the things that could go wrong. A broken leg was serious enough, but pneumonia from the cold water could be deadly. She had seen it happen before. Her own father had succumbed to fever and infection after what seemed like a minor injury. No, she couldn't lose Adam. Not when they had only just found each other. Dr. Jenkins' office was lit up like a beacon in the darkened Main Street. Margaret barely waited for the sheriff's wagon to stop before she was jumping down, rushing inside to find Adam. The doctor looked up from his desk as she entered, his face tired but not grave. "Miss Coleman, I expected you'd be along." "Where is he?" she asked urgently. "Through there." Jenkins indicated a door leading to a back room. "Resting comfortably now. The legs set, ribs are bandaged. Gave him something for the pain so he might be a bit groggy." Margaret pushed through the door to find Adam lying on a narrow bed, his left leg splinted and elevated, his torso wrapped in tight bandages. His face was pale beneath his tan, a bruise darkening one cheekbone. But his eyes were open, and when he saw her, he managed a weak smile. "Margaret," he said, his voice hoarse, "you didn't have to come all this way." She was at his side in an instant, taking his hand in both of hers. "Of course I did, you fool. What were you thinking, trying to swim in a creek in December?" His laugh turned into a wince. "Wasn't exactly voluntary." "How's the family we rescued? Trust you to think of others right now," she said, shaking her head. "Sheriff Willis said they're fine, all safe in town." "Good." Adam closed his eyes briefly, his face tightening with pain before relaxing again. "Doc says I'll be laid up for a while. 6 weeks at least for the leg to heal properly." "Then that's how long it will take," Margaret said firmly. "We'll manage." He looked at her with such tenderness that it made her throat tighten. "I'm sorry about Christmas. The celebration we planned can wait," she interrupted. "All that matters is that you're all right." Dr. Jenkins entered, carrying a steaming cup. "Time for more willow bark tea," he announced. Help him sit up a bit, Miss Coleman, if you would." Together they got Adam upright enough to sip the bitter medicine. When he was settled back against the pillows, Jenkins turned to Margaret. "He can be moved tomorrow if the weather holds. Better for him to recover at home than here in my cramped quarters, but he'll need careful tending. That leg mustn't bear weight for at least 6 weeks, and those ribs need time to knit as well." "I'll take care of him," Margaret promised without hesitation. "I figured as much," the doctor said with a knowing smile. "You can stay here tonight if you wish. There's a cot in my office you're welcome to use." After the doctor left them alone, Adam's fingers tightened around hers. "You don't have to do this, Margaret. I can hire a nurse from Phoenix." "Don't be ridiculous," she said. "I'm perfectly capable of nursing you back to health." "I know you are. That's not the point." His eyes held her steadily despite the pain medication clouding them. "I don't want you to feel obligated. You came to my ranch as a guest, not a caretaker." Margaret leaned forward, her free hand gently touching his bruised face. "I'm not staying out of obligation, Adam. I'm staying because I care about you, because I—" She paused, gathering courage. "Because I love you." It was the first time she had said the words aloud, though they had been growing in her heart for weeks. Adam's eyes widened, then softened with emotion. "Margaret," he whispered, "I love you too. Have since almost the beginning, I think." She bent to kiss him gently, mindful of his injuries. His hand came up to cup the back of her head, holding her close for a moment before releasing her. "Not exactly how I planned to tell you," he admitted with a rueful smile. "Nothing about us has gone according to plan," she pointed out. "Why start now?" The journey back to the ranch the next day was slow and careful, Adam secured in the back of a wagon cushioned with blankets. Margaret rode beside him, watching for signs of discomfort at every bump in the road. Elizabeth was waiting anxiously when they arrived, her eyes widening at the sight of Adam being carried into the house by 2 ranch hands. "He's going to be fine," Margaret assured her sister. "But he'll need peace and quiet to recover." Mrs. Barton had prepared the downstairs guest room, knowing Adam wouldn't be able to manage the stairs for some time. It was a spacious room with large windows that would allow him to see the ranch activities even while confined to bed. Once Adam was settled, a routine quickly established itself. Margaret took charge of his care, changing bandages, administering medicine, and ensuring he rested properly. Mrs. Barton managed the household and cooked special broths and meals to help him regain his strength. Elizabeth read to him during the afternoons, keeping his mind engaged when boredom threatened. The ranch hands, meanwhile, stepped up to handle the daily operations, led by Sam Davis, Adam's foreman. They reported to Adam each evening, keeping him informed while assuring him everything was under control. As Christmas approached, Margaret was determined that Adam's injuries wouldn't spoil the holiday entirely. Though the large celebration they had planned was postponed, she organized a small, intimate gathering in Adam's room on Christmas Eve. Mrs. Barton outdid herself with a feast that filled the house with delicious aromas. Elizabeth decorated a small pine tree that the ranch hands brought in, placing it where Adam could see it from his bed. They sang carols and exchanged modest gifts, handkerchiefs embroidered by Margaret for the men, a knitted scarf for Mrs. Barton, books for Elizabeth. When the others had retired for the night, Margaret remained with Adam, sitting beside his bed in the glow of the fire and the candles on the small tree. "It was a good Christmas after all," he said, watching her with contentment. "Yes, it was," she agreed. "Different than planned, but special in its own way." Adam reached for her hand. "I have something for you. In my bureau top drawer, there's a small box." Curious, Margaret retrieved the box, a simple wooden affair, hand-carved with a pattern of desert flowers. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft cloth, was a ring. The band was gold, set with a small but perfect diamond that caught the firelight. "It was my mother's," Adam explained. "The only thing of value I brought with me from Missouri. My father gave it to her when they homesteaded together, started their life from nothing but hope and hard work." Margaret stared at the ring, her heart racing. "Adam, I know the timing isn't ideal," he continued. "Flat on my back isn't how I pictured proposing. But these past weeks, having you care for me, seeing your strength and your heart. Margaret, I don't want to wait any longer. I want to ask you properly to stay, not just for the winter, but for good. As my wife." Tears filled her eyes as she looked from the ring to his earnest face. "Are you sure? You're not just grateful because I've been nursing you?" Adam laughed softly. "I decided to ask you weeks ago. Had it all planned out for Christmas, a romantic ride, sunset proposal, the whole thing. Then I went and fell in a creek." Margaret couldn't help laughing through her tears. "That does sound lovely, but so is this in its own way." "Is that a yes?" he asked, his eyes hopeful. Instead of answering immediately, Margaret took the ring from its box and slid it onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. "Yes," she said, bending to kiss him. "Yes, I will marry you, Adam Everlie." His arms came around her, pulling her gently down beside him on the bed. They held each other in the soft light of Christmas, speaking of dreams and plans for the future they would build together. Spring came early to the desert that year, with February bringing warm breezes and wildflowers spreading across the landscape in a riot of color. Adam's leg had healed well, though he still walked with a slight limp that the doctor assured him would fade with time and exercise. The ranch flourished under the combined care of Adam and Margaret, whose organizational skills had improved efficiency in every aspect of operations. Elizabeth had blossomed too, excelling in her studies and developing a close circle of friends in town. As for the wedding, they had decided not to wait. With Adam recovered and the weather favorable, they chose the first Saturday in March for the ceremony. It would be held at the ranch, with Reverend Thomas from the Vulture City Church officiating. The day dawned clear and perfect, with just enough coolness in the morning air to make the warmth of the afternoon welcome. Margaret stood in her bedroom, Elizabeth helping her with the final adjustments to her wedding dress, a creation of ivory silk ordered from Phoenix, simple but elegant with lace at the collar and cuffs. "You look beautiful, Maddie," Elizabeth said, her eyes shining with tears of happiness. "I wish Mother and Father could see you today." "I think they can," Margaret replied softly, "in their own way." A knock at the door revealed Mrs. Barton, herself resplendent in a new dress of deep blue. "It's time, my dear. Everyone's gathered in the garden." Taking a deep breath, Margaret followed the housekeeper downstairs and out to the garden behind the house. Adam had transformed it for the occasion, with arches of early blooming flowers and ribbons creating an aisle that led to where he stood waiting beneath a bower of desert blossoms. As Margaret walked toward him on Sheriff Willis's arm, the lawman having volunteered to give her away in her father's absence, she saw only Adam, tall and handsome in his best suit, his eyes fixed on her with such love that it took her breath away. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. They exchanged traditional vows, promises to love and cherish each other through all the seasons of life. When Adam slipped a gold band to join the engagement ring on her finger, his hands were steady and sure. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Thomas declared. "Mr. Everlie, you may kiss your bride." Adam's kiss was gentle yet possessing, a promise of the life they would share. The small gathering of friends and neighbors applauded as they turned to face them as husband and wife. The celebration that followed was everything their Christmas gathering should have been, filled with music, dancing, Adam managing admirably despite his healing leg, and enough food to feed half of Vulture City. Margaret moved through it all in a happy daze, scarcely able to believe that this was her life now, surrounded by friends, married to a man she adored, with a home and future secure. As the evening light faded to dusk, lanterns were lit around the garden, casting a magical glow over the continuing festivities. Adam found Margaret standing slightly apart, watching Elizabeth dance with the blacksmith's son. "Happy, Mrs. Everleigh?" he asked, slipping an arm around her waist. The name sent a thrill through her. "More than I ever thought possible," she answered honestly. "Are you, completely?" He kissed her temple. "Did I mention there's one more wedding gift I have for you?" "Adam, you've given me so much already. This one's special," he interrupted with a mysterious smile. "Come with me." Curious, she allowed him to lead her away from the celebration, toward the grove of cottonwood trees that lined the creek running through the property. As they approached, Margaret saw that something had been built among the trees, a small, perfect cottage, its windows glowing with welcoming light. "What is this?" she asked, amazed. "I had the men working on it in secret these past weeks," Adam explained. "Thought Elizabeth might appreciate having the main house to herself tonight, and we could use some privacy." Margaret blushed, understanding his meaning. Though they had kissed quite passionately at times during their courtship, Adam had been respectfully restrained, mindful of propriety and his own injuries. "It's not just for tonight," he continued, leading her to the door. "I thought it could be a special place for us, somewhere to escape when the ranch gets too busy. And maybe someday, when the main house gets noisy with children." The implication made Margaret's heart skip. They had spoken of children, both agreeing they wanted a family, but hearing Adam reference it so naturally, as an expected part of their future, filled her with joy. The interior of the cottage was a single room, simply but beautifully furnished with a large bed, a small sitting area before a fireplace, and a table set with wine and fruit. "It's perfect," Margaret whispered, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. "Like something from a fairy tale." Adam closed the door behind them, then took her in his arms. "You deserve a fairy tale, Margaret. After everything you've been through, all you've overcome, you deserve every happiness." She reached up to touch his face, overwhelmed with love for this man who had rescued her in more ways than one. "We both do." Their kiss deepened, years of loneliness dissolving in the warmth of found love. As Adam's hands moved to the buttons of her wedding dress, Margaret let go of the last of her fears and surrendered to the promise of their future together. 5 years later, Margaret sat on the front porch of the ranch house, watching her 3-year-old son Samuel chase butterflies across the yard while her infant daughter Catherine slept in her arms. The ranch had prospered beyond their expectations, expanding to include additional grazing lands and a successful horse breeding program that Adam had developed. Elizabeth, now 21, had recently married Jenny Collins's brother Matthew, a skilled blacksmith who had built a shop on the edge of the Everleigh property. The young couple lived in a cottage similar to the one Adam had built for their wedding night, which remained a special retreat for Margaret and Adam when they needed time alone. Mrs. Barton still ruled the kitchen, though she had trained several younger women to assist her as the ranch household grew. She doted on the children as if they were her own grandchildren, spoiling them with cookies and stories whenever Margaret wasn't looking. As for Adam and Margaret, their love had only deepened with the passing years. The challenges they faced, droughts, difficult births, occasional disputes with neighboring ranchers, had strengthened rather than weakened their bond. Adam emerged from the barn, dusty from a day's work but smiling when he saw his family waiting. Samuel spotted his father and ran to him with a squeal of delight, to be swept up into strong arms and perched on broad shoulders. "How are my favorite people in the world?" Adam asked, climbing the porch steps to kiss Margaret and peek at his sleeping daughter. "Happy to see you," Margaret replied, leaning into his side as he settled beside her on the swing. "We've had a letter from Lizzie. She and Matthew will be back from Phoenix tomorrow." "Good. Been too quiet without them." Adam bounced Samuel gently on his knee. "Sam and I have big plans, don't we, partner? Going to teach you to ride that new pony next week." "Pony," Samuel agreed enthusiastically. Margaret shook her head with fond exasperation. "He's barely 3, Adam." "I was riding at his age," Adam pointed out. "He'll be fine. I'll be right there with him." She knew better than to argue. Adam was an attentive father, protective but also determined to raise children who would be at home in this wild, beautiful land they called their own. As the sun began to set, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson, Margaret reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From that terrible day when she had been stabbed defending Elizabeth, through the fear and uncertainty of finding themselves alone and vulnerable, to the moment Adam had found them and brought them to safety, every step, even the painful ones, had led to this life of love and contentment. "What are you thinking about so seriously?" Adam asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. Margaret smiled, leaning over to kiss him softly. "Just how fortunate we are, how one moment of kindness from a stranger changed everything." "Not strangers anymore," Adam said, echoing words he had spoken years ago. "No," Margaret agreed, looking at their children, their home, the life they had built together. "Not strangers at all, family." As darkness fell and the first stars appeared in the vast desert sky, they gathered their children and went inside. To the warmth and light of the home they had created a sanctuary built on courage, perseverance, and love that had begun in the most unlikely of circumstances and grown into something beautiful and enduring.